Hello and welcome back to Secret Histories. I'm Brian Keene. In this series, we are going through each and every book that I've ever had published in chronological order, and I'm telling you about the history of them and behind the scenes. I am not a professional filmmaker. These are shot on my iPhone, sitting on the floor in my office. Occasionally, cats will wander into the frame. In fact, right now, uh, depending on the volume on the device you're listening to, you may hear one of my cats, Josie Wales, in the background playing with her jingle ball because she decided this would be the perfect time to do that. Anyway, today we're going to talk about fear of gravity. Because we are going in chronological order, we should be talking about Terminal next. Terminal was published both before and after Fear of Gravity. And rather than getting way into the weeds and talking about that here, we're going to talk about that in our next video, which is in fact about my second novel, Terminal. Some of its history impacts Fear of Gravity. And for those parts, I'll talk about them here in this video. But for Terminal's main history, you'll want to watch the next video in this series. So Fear of Gravity, first published in 2004 by Delirium Books. I have never said this, but more than one historian, literary historian, horror historian, more than one critic, more than one academic have written articles or given talks or mentioned in reviews or opined online that Eminem and I have a similar career path, similar backgrounds, similar career path, similar audiences. I think that's apt. If I can say that without being accused of being arrogant, I think it is apt. We both came from white trash, blue collar backgrounds. We both reached an audience in our genres that hadn't quite been there before. We both were shit on by everybody. And we both had to just keep showing and proving and keep hustling until we'd made it. It is not lost on me that Fear of Gravity came out around the same time as the Eminem Show and then 8 Mile. And if you look at Terminal and City of the Dead, which followed this almost immediately, they had sort of the same impact on my career that that album and that film had on Eminem's career. I don't know why I'm bringing that up now, other than it just occurred to me while we were talking about this. I don't often think about my books in chronological order and think about what else was going on in the world at that time, history-wise, but that occurred to me as I started recording this. I guess it's because this was the first book where a critic or a reviewer made that comparison. It wasn't the last, but this was the first one where I remember the comparison being made. So anyway, 2004, Fear of Gravity. As you'll remember, The Rising at this point is a huge hit, okay? As I said, Terminal came out both before and after this. A novella-length version of Terminal came out before this book. The novel version would come out after this book. But despite The Rising's success, at this point, it's made the bestseller list. It's been featured in the New York Times. It's been featured in Fangoria, in Rue Morgue. Everybody's calling us the future of horror. We've saved horror fiction. It's back in bookstores. It's back at the grocery store. For the first time ever, horror fiction's being sold at Walmart. But the money wasn't coming in. So you may remember from our last two videos, I was scrambling to come up with and come out with stuff to keep the lights on, keep the mortgage paid until the novel version of Terminal and City of the Dead could drop. And this was one of those ways. This was a brand new short story collection composed of what I think are much better stories than can be found in No Rest for the Wicked. Here's the table of contents. Dust was one of the first stories that really got me on people's radars. Came out before The Rising was published. It was written maybe a month after 9/11 happened, and it's about 9/11. It was one of the first stories in our genre to actually deal directly with 9/11. I remember that was my first real interaction with Ellen Datlow, who praised the story. And a lot of other folks folks who I deeply admired and looked up to. But Bubbles, did you have anything you wanted to add? Folks who I deeply admired and looked up to, but who for one reason or another I was timid as hell to approach, were suddenly approaching me. And it was because of Dust. Babylon Falling, we talked about in two videos ago when we talked about the rise and fall of Babylon. So yeah, you can see, of course, the revolution happened while you were sleeping. A summoning spell, we talked about that when we covered Talking Smack. It was basically a declaration of war against the old guard in the genre. This brings back memories. As I said, I'd become a success based on that first novel, but it was already starting to impact my marriage, and not in a good way. And we'll get into that more later, but yeah, when I look at Fear of Gravity, I think about that. This is when the fall started, and I didn't even know it. And it was years before divorce or anything, but this is where it started. I was a person who put this first in hindsight. And by this, I don't mean Fear of Gravity. I mean writing and that quest for success. Hindsight's 20/20, as they say, and my ex and I remain best friends. She really is one of my best friends. But she didn't sign up for all the shit that came with this career. And there was a lot of it, which we'll get into later. Anyway, Fear of Gravity was published in a signed limited edition of how many copies? I want to say 300 maybe. Always hard to do this with one hand, and I should have prepared, but I didn't. I'm going to make the collectors scream because I'm going to bend this signature sheet, and I still couldn't fucking get it open. There it is. Damn it. All right. 400 copies. All right, so I was wrong. It was published in 400 copies. There was a lettered edition, which looks exactly like the signed limited edition, except it came in that slipcase. There was eventually a trade paperback. I think there were probably around maybe 5,000, 10,000 copies of this printed. And as far as foreign translations, there's only ever been one, this German edition, which I don't think is in print anymore. Long out of print, but this was actually my first foreign language translation. So that was very cool. It will always have a nostalgic value to me for that. As I said, the stories in this, I think, are a lot better than the stories that were included in No Rest for the Wicked. I was proud of this one, and I remain proud of this one. There's some good stuff in here. It is currently out of print, but all of the stories in here have been collected in the Complete Short Fiction of Brian Keene series. And I guess eventually maybe I will just go ahead and reprint this as well, just for the completists out there. But that's probably a ways off. The cover was by Alan Clark. It was my first Alan Clark cover, certainly not my last, but my first one by him, and I was delighted to have him because, my God, he was everybody's favorite artist at that point in horror history. I always think back to his covers for Tim Levin's stuff early on. Just amazing, amazing. Anyway, that is a little bit about Fear of Gravity. Next time we will get into Terminal. And that's going to be a much longer video because it's a much longer and convoluted history. Hang on tight. It's a very long story. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.